Oops.
Good evening, everybody, to the third MS Writers Workshop. And the theme this evening is the publishing process. And before I introduce our guests, I'd just like to say that there's a Q&A section down below. So if anybody has any questions about the publishing or anything to writing, just put them into the Q&A and I'll pass them on to our guests and we'll try and get through as many as possible during the talk. So I'd like to introduce our guest, Paula Elmore, who's been working in publishing almost all her life, according to Trevis. And after a decade-long stint as editor of Collins Press, Paula is now a freelance editor and publishing consultant. You're based in County Westmeath. And our host, Trevis, has written many books, including his latest book is called Living Well with Multiple Sclerosis. So it'll be great to have a chat now between you, getting the viewpoints from the editor and the author. So without further ado, I'll hand over now to Trevis.
Thank you, Fergal. And it'll be two opposing views sometimes when it comes to the editor and publisher and the writer. But sure, we've become friends. Hello, everyone. Welcome. As Fergal said, I'm Trevis L Gleason. I'll be your host for this installment of the MS Ireland's MS Writers Workshop series. We thank the editorial team of the MS Ireland MS and Me blog for putting this idea for these workshops to the fore. They began as something that were intended just for the MS and Me bloggers, but interest was expressed from across the MS community, and now they're open to people interested in writing, no matter their place in the world or their connection to MS. So you're very welcomed to all of you. In past episodes, Emma Rogan and I talked about living and writing with MS. Jack Murray led us on kind of a storytelling journey. Tonight, we get into the process of getting your work published with something of a quiet icon, I'd say, in the publishing world, Paula Elmore. Oh, stop. We do thank MS Ireland for giving us this platform and giving us the support to have these discussions. And as Fergal mentioned, we'd like, if you have any questions, that you would submit them in the Q&A section, not the chat section. And we will get to them, as many of them as we can tonight. They'll be put through to us and we'll fold them in where it makes sense. Also, we are recording this session, so it will be available to view in the next few days. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. So if you want to pop back in, if you missed something or share it with anyone, it will be there in the next couple of days, as are all of the other writers' workshops and a number of other webcasts by the folks at MS Ireland. So Paula Elmore, I suppose I should say as a disclaimer, if nothing else, that we have worked together on a number of projects, both in her capacity as a publisher as well as a consultant. She has been an invaluable part of my work, and I'm also proud to call her my friend, but I'm not going to leave off the hardball questions, Paula, so you must be ready for those. So I thank you for joining us. I'm wondering if maybe you'll give us a synopsis of your work experience in the publishing business. It is both broad and deep, and I wasn't joking that it seems like for most of your life you've been in the world. But maybe just to give our viewers a concept of the lens that you will be directing us from.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to spend time in your company, Trevis. I kind of fell into publishing by accident. I mean, I was always a bookish person, always read hugely as a child. But when I graduated with a degree in English literature back in the late 1980s, there wasn't a lot of work around. And after knocking about Dublin for a while in a fairly dead-end job, I took myself over to London, where they were giving out magazines full of free job ads. I did three job interviews in one day, and one of them was with a publishing company. I thought, why not? Because, books, and the company was Macmillan. And 2 years later, through that company, I heard of a job in production in Gill and Macmillan in Dublin. So I applied for that and got it, which was great. And a few years later then, when the job arose in the Collins Press in Cork, I grabbed that with both hands. That was moving into editorial, but I was still doing the production because that was a very small company. There were only 5 of us there. And then latterly, when Con and Anna Collins decided to retire, they sold the company. And when it closed its doors, I decided I would set myself up as freelance. And that was 5 years ago now. And shortly after that, COVID happened. So it was a great time to be working from home.
Now you've thrown out a few terms there that hopefully we'll get into a little bit deeper, but there was production, there was editing. So a lot of people, I certainly wasn't familiar with any of that when I got involved with trying to get my first book published. And certainly it's a very steep learning curve. So we'll get into all of those little bits as we go on. Now, many of our viewers they're hobby writers or people who are just getting into the joys of writing, perhaps. We also have a group of writers who have a fair bit of writing under their belts and may have even had a piece or two published, or we've got some writing groups that have published books together. We've got our MS&Me bloggers, etc. We write fiction, we write nonfiction, fantasy, or some of us just, write for the love, for the joy of it. So we will cover a broad swath with your very ample brush of experiences. So let's start with, I suppose, an overview of what we deemed the publishing process. Maybe we'll get to self-publishing a little bit later, because I know that's a bigger thing that it used to be. But we'll begin with what we'll call conventional publishing. So go ahead.
I was going to say, just before I launch into that, you said very, very sensibly there, yes, I've used some terms, and when you're new to publishing, it can all seem very strange. So I want to tell you about 2 lessons that I learned very early on in my career. And one of them was, the only stupid question is the unasked one. If you don't understand something, if you've got a contract with a publisher and they're talking about things and you don't understand, ask the questions, because people who work in publishing, like me, we're producing books all day, every day. It's what we do, and we forget what people don't understand and what people don't know. And I'm always afraid that I've gone to the other extreme, because, I'd be trying to explain maybe the physicality of a book to an author, that, your book is going to be cased, but it's going to have a printed laminated case on it rather than a jacket, or maybe it'll have both. And it's, how far do you have to go into explaining that? So I'm very conscious that for people who maybe first-time authors in particular, they might not understand the process. I probably over-explain a little bit, but always ask a question. But the other one, to understand what happens in a publishing house, Trevis, I know you know this story, but it was a very, very good lesson that I learned very early on. In my first job in publishing in Macmillan, we had to do an induction course. They ran this course twice a year. So anybody who joined the company in the previous 6 months was sent down to a prefab in Basingstoke, which wasn't very prepossessing, because I was working in London and it was glamorous and exciting. So we're sitting there in a prefab in Basingstoke, all looking at each other, about a dozen people who joined in the previous 6 months. And in walked Mike Barnard, who at the time was the production and distribution director of the entire Macmillan Group worldwide. So like, he was a demigod type of person. And he says, congratulations, you've all just acquired your job in publishing, and it's something that a lot of people want. What is it we do? What is it you think Macmillan do? And we all just looked down at the desk and thought, well, clearly he doesn't want us to say we publish books. So when nobody answered his question, after a little while, he said, we're a business. We're here to make money. And once you understand that about a publisher, it makes sense of an awful lot of things. Some authors have huge difficulty. I've worked with some authors who can't trust us to do the best we can with their book. But when you're working with a publisher, they need your book to be a financial and commercial success. So they're going to bring all their experience to bear to make it the best it can be. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. But also, if and when you do get those rejections, it's not personal. It's really not personal. It is the publisher saying, we don't think we can make a commercial success of this book. So it may be that you've approached a publisher who's too big for the audience that you might have, or it's just simply not the sort of book that they publish. And we can get into a bit more of that later. But once you understand that where a publisher is coming from, hopefully it will help you understand a little bit more about why they do what they do. So you've signed on the dotted line, you've got your contract. There are a couple of things that kind of happen sometimes simultaneously, but from my point of view, the first thing is the edit. And
I'm going to stop you right there, because we're talking, let's begin with submissions. So before we've signed on the dotted line, we've got a book that we think is saleable. We've written something, we're proud of it, etc. should we, as you know well, I usually do, I will charter a private not an accountant. Geez, I've been watching too many Monty Python films. An editor, and go through that process. Well, a difficult process, but it becomes. I've worked with the same editor for a number of books, privately, to get it to a place that it is more saleable. It's polished. And then of course it has to go through that again and again and again. But let's say that we've got it to that point. Well, no, let's not. I've got a manuscript I think is pretty good. Should I have it edited before I send it off to a publisher?
Absolutely, yes. Because you will be so concerned with the content, there'll be a million things that you'll miss, and you only get one chance to make a good impression. It's very, very rare that a publisher will say to an author who submitted their manuscript, you need to do X, Y, and Z, go off and do that and resubmit it. It's generally yes or no. Okay. So it's, publishers are working with an awful lot of submissions, those that will even accept submissions. A lot of publishers won't accept unsolicited manuscripts. Companies like Gill and Macmillan, 70% of their work they commission. They go out looking for the authors to write the books. Now, when you consider that they have a huge educational arm, of course they're going out to the teachers saying, will you write the book for your subject? But they're also going out tracking down journalists who are following a particular story, or they'll contact particular individuals who may have an interesting autobiography in them. So an awful lot of work is actually commissioned, which is probably now wandering off the topic a little bit. But I'm going to read out a few things for you that copy editors do. I think that might be helpful, because it might help persuade you that getting your book copy edited is really worthwhile.
Please do. Before you do start, a few people are putting questions into the chat box. What we're requesting everyone is that you put them into the Q&A section, because that'll make it easier for us to attend to them. So please don't use the chat function, but put it in the Q&A. Thanks, Emil. So yes, what's a copy editor going to do with my precious words that I have sweat and struggled and cried over and then put in order that I think are the bee's knees?
Well, the first thing I would say is when you're contacting a freelance editor, you can ask them to review your script and ask them just to look at it and see what they think it requires. So you can ask for basically a reader's report, what the editor thinks of it. Do they think it's publishable? Do they think it needs particularly more work? I've worked on some scripts where I've done a deep dive on the first chapter and said to the author, this is what you need to do with the rest of it. And they've gone off and done it themselves. Obviously, the more work you ask an editor to do, the more expensive it can become. They may say it requires a structural edit or a developmental edit. Developmental edits, I think, in particular relate to fiction, but structural edits are sometimes necessary for non-fiction books. I once was asked to look at a script from this particular individual who was writing a self-help book, and there were no chapters. So that wasn't very helpful. So that's what I mean by structural edit. Is it in the right order? Is it in chapters? That sort of thing. So what a copy editor does, everybody knows that we're going to fix errors in grammar and punctuation, but we'll also look for errors in style and voice. You can sometimes spot when somebody has copied something directly off the internet because the tone changes entirely. So apart from the fact that you shouldn't be plagiarizing anything off the internet, you want your style and your voice to be consistent. But we'll also be looking for missing information, mislabeled information, wrong information. Now, fact checking is a very particular thing. It can be very time consuming. So you would need to be very clear in your brief with the editor. The editor will generally assume that you are the subject matter expert, and they'll trust you that the information that you've put down there is right. But if you want them to fact check, that is something else you'd have to brief them for specially, because that would be fairly time consuming and they wouldn't generally include that. But we'll also look for bias in your language. We look for blind spots, for politically incorrect information, or politically incorrect language, that's an absolute minefield at the moment because it's so easy to get it wrong, completely unintentionally. We will look for potential libel as well, and we can advise you on that. Although with the caveat, we're not lawyers. We can't guarantee you that somebody won't sue you, but we can say, look, you're sailing very close to the wind here, or you have actually libeled this individual. Because the interesting thing is, it doesn't matter what the truth of the matter is. If you accuse somebody of a crime, unless they've been convicted of that crime, you have libeled them if you put it into print. So it's a bit unfortunate, but there you go. We can advise about copyright problems as well. But the great thing about getting an editor is that we will see what you've written, not what you think you've written, because we'll be there reading with the reader's eyes, and you are so involved in the content. You may have gone off on a particular rant, or just you've gotten into a particular flow, but you might not have conveyed what you want to say. So the editor frequently will be advocating on behalf of the reader as to what it is you should be maybe rephrasing. And one of the delightful things, the thing I love most about my job, is that you may change one word in a paragraph and it transforms that paragraph. It's, sometimes editing can be incredibly subtle. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, like you practically need to rewrite because there's just so much information there, but it needs more style or whatever. But frequently it's just change one word and it's grand. We look for repetition, we look for overused phrases, we look for ambiguity. The ambiguity is a big one. We will check for readability. And what I like to think is that we uphold quality, credibility, and standards. But above all, our work should be invisible. What we see at the end of the day is your voice. And it's very unfortunate because the reader is only going to see what editors miss, like as in the typo. It's worth knowing that the very best of editors, and I wouldn't say I'm necessarily in that cohort, we will pick up only on 95% of mistakes. So the fewer mistakes there are in your script going forward, the more chance you have of having an error-free book in publication. Even though, because you might think, well, if I get the publishing contract, they're going to edit the book for me anyway. It's worth having it as to the best standard that you can before you get to that point. Partly because it improves your chance of getting a publishing contract in the first place, but also you don't know how much time and effort the publisher is going to have to put into your book. So I hope I've convinced you of the benefits.
No, you have indeed. And I think one of the important parts, and I can speak to a personal experience here, it was a little bit different with my first book, Chef Interrupted, that you worked on. The Irish publication of it had been published in the United States by Coffeetown Press. It had won an international award, and I had pitched it to Con Collins of Collins Press, and he thought it was a great idea, and then took the book back and did exactly what you said most publishers wouldn't. He said, "This is great, but you need to go and do some work on it." And he suggested an editor because we needed to make it not quite so. How did he put it? It can be wide-eyed, but you're awfully starry-eyed here, Trevis, about Ireland. So I went to an editor that was suggested to kind of point out those Americanisms and that sort of thing. And this particular editor wanted a whole rewrite. So she didn't like my sentence structure, my paragraph structure. She didn't like the voice. She didn't like the tone. My comeback was, okay, thank you. But I only need this done, and it just won an international award, so I'm okay with the voice. But it is important to make sure that you get on, I suppose, that you respect the person that you find. So, a lot of times people might think this is sort of like, I don't know, going to a GP and there's only a couple in your town and you only have so much to choose from. How do you find out about an editor that you might like? I mean, I know what I do is I flip back to the acknowledgements in the back of a book that I've liked and felt good and see who they used as an editor, etc. But how, in a place like Ireland, and I know that we're international here, how does one find an editor like yourself? But I know you're way too busy. You're too busy for me even.
Oh, never too busy for you, Trevis. It's actually very easy in Ireland because we have the Association of Freelance Editors, Proofreaders and Indexers of Ireland. So that's FEPI-Ireland.
That's not a real thing.
That is.
So say it again, and is there a website for them?
There is absolutely a website. So it's the Association of Freelance Editors, Proofreaders and Indexers of Ireland, FEPI. So the website is fepi-ireland.com. And we even have a contact us button. So you don't even have to scroll through all the different editors and see if there's one there that you like. The best thing probably is to hit the contact us button, put in as much information as you can. An email goes out to all the members. There's about 60 or 70 of us. And then the people who feel that they can most effectively work with your script, because inevitably some editors work in sports books, some are cookbook specialists, as you know, and some are simply not free. So it's one of the biggest difficulties an awful lot of prospective authors have is they contact a few editors from the FEPI membership, and they think like, can you take my book on next week? And you're going, holy God, like I'm booked up for the year, a year in advance. No is the answer. But you might find somebody who happens to be free at that time. So it's worth sending out the email that will contact all the membership. Or you can go through the website is really good because you can look us up by specialty. You can look us up by, do you want a copy edit? You may already know that you want a developmental edit or a structural edit, or you may think, no, I think my book is in pretty good shape. I think all it needs is a top and tail, like a quick copy edit. So check out the website. There's a lot of useful information there. But I have to say, I've met my colleagues on several occasions. They're marvelous people, because I had thought setting up as a freelance, we'd all be in competition with each other. And it's not like that at all. We frequently will email the group and say, look, one of my regular clients has come back to me. They have a job I can't take on with it. Is anybody out there interested? I'll pass on your details. So it's a very friendly group. We had a lovely, we met up in Dublin in the Royal Irish Academy back in February. And you just know when you've found your tribe.
There you are. So you brought up an interesting, the time frame thing is in my head, and I want to get to that part. But before I do, we've had a question come through, and I know what has worked for me, and it's certainly in America, it's significantly different than it is here in Ireland. Literary agents. Do you need one? Is it helpful? Is it difficult? I know in America, you kind of can't get into a publisher's door without a publisher or an agent pitching for you, and they've got those relationships, etc. But I got the impression that it's not quite the same in Ireland. Talk to me.
Well, publishing in Ireland is tiny in comparison to publishing in just New York or just London. I mean, I honestly think that there are more people employed in one of the big four accountancy firms than are employed directly in publishing in Ireland in total. There are a lot of, if you look at the Publishing Ireland website, you can see the number of member publishers there are. An awful lot of them are very small publishers that they might have only 3 or 4 people working for them, which is kind of wandering off topic, I know. Yes, it's worthwhile getting an agent if you can. Brian Langan, who is one of the editors in FEPI Ireland, he does some agency work as well. The advantage of getting an agent is that they will know which publishers might be interested in your script. But it's not an either-or situation. I was advised once by an author, she was a successful children's novelist. She said, you don't have to go looking just for an agent or just for a publisher. Do both simultaneously, because if you land a contract with one, you really improve the chances of landing a contract with another. Because if you are looking for an agent, and they can be very useful because they can talk you through the intricacies of the publishing contract, they will, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. Sorry about that. They'll know who to send your script to. But if you can say to an agent that you already have interest from a publisher, you stand a much, much better chance of getting the agent. If you know what I mean.
So it's a chicken and egg sort of thing here.
Well, it's kind of do a bit of both. You don't necessarily have to get an agent though to get a publisher, because if you do the homework yourself, who is already publishing in your area? If you have an idea of how many books you think your book is going to sell, if it's a very personal memoir and you think it's only going to sell to your family and friends, you might do 500 copies. You're not going to be looking to sell your book to Hachette or Penguin or Gill and Macmillan, or Gill as they are now. They're simply too big. And again, it goes back to that whole thing about them being a business. For the larger companies, they would be looking at a minimum print run, generally, like very broad brushstrokes, of about 5,000 copies and possibly more before the book would work financially for them, because they have to pay the editors, design. See, this is the great thing about getting a publishing contract. All of the work is done for you and you get paid for it. You get a royalty at the end of the day. Somebody else takes on with the financial risk of designing the cover, the interior, getting the book printed, delivered, the sales, publicity and marketing, all of that. So yes, it's worth getting a publishing contract if you can. Yes, it's worth getting an agent if you can. No guarantees in either. It is very tough. It is a very tough market.
Now, and another question that's come up to me before is, how did you find a publisher? I didn't have a foreign agent, etc. I met Con Collins, my first publisher in Ireland, by going to a book launch of another author here on the Dingle Peninsula, and ran into him, and we started, chat as one does here and there. And that's how that whole thing started. So you just never know kind of where that's coming. I want to ask the question now, back to the timeline is, so let's say, all right, you were talking about how somebody will want it edited next week. Well, that's just not going to happen. So once let's say I've submitted my manuscript because it was, someone said, yes, we'll take a look at it. Usually on the publisher's website, it will say kind of how long that takes, be it 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, or whatever. But from the time that someone says, yes, this is a good idea, we'd like to do a contract, how long typically before that book hits the shelves? Just for people to understand that it's not tomorrow.
I'm going to do what I'm always doing here, Trevis. I'm not going to answer your question directly. There are 2 seasons in publishing. There's spring and there's autumn. And if you were to submit your book, say, and it was accepted in March, it would probably be the following spring when it was published. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to being published in either season. First-time authors are unlikely to get published for the Christmas market because you're up against, like you've all seen the advertising. It's the big heavy hitters, where all the big cookbooks, all the gifty books, and they have a big heavy marketing spend or publicity spend behind them. So it wouldn't be fair to put a first-time author in there, unless it happened to be, TV personality publishing their autobiography, that. But then again, that would go into the kind of the gifty market. It depends what your book is about as well, because if it's about a sort of a spring subject like, self-help, diet, all this sort of stuff, or walking guides, children's fiction as well, that'll get published a little bit closer to the summer, because the summer holiday is a great time for reading. But the fastest, you will be quicker getting your book published if you self-publish, inevitably, because you have to fit in with the publisher's schedule. One of my clients, with the publishing clients that I'm working with, again, because they're a business, their list is full up all the way through 2025. They're starting to look at spring 26. So even if they say yes now to your book, they may simply say, well, we have too many books to market in that particular genre, and we want to put you into a later season simply because of that. So there is no simple, direct answer. But in the sort of the once you get into the train and they've given you a publishing date, you submitted your book, it's been accepted, say, in September. I'll take that one for the following year. So I'd start editing the book through September. It takes about 6 weeks maybe for the first edit. You generally be given 2 weeks to come back with the answers. We may have to do a second round of editing depending on what it is. I'm doing a lot of children's and YA fiction at the moment, which is great fun. But my God, like you'll do 3 or 4 rounds of developmental editing before you even start the copy edit. And then once it gets into page proofs, that for novels, like you can have page proofs in 3 days. It's very, very quick. If it's a very heavily illustrated book, that could take a little bit longer because you'd have to agree the design, which could take about 2 weeks, and then probably another 2 to 3 weeks before page proofs are issued. That's when it starts to look like a book. I think that's probably much more exciting for authors than the copy edit, because I always feel so bad as an editor because someone has put all this work, this blood, sweat and tears into a script, and my job as an editor is to pick out all the things that aren't working and fix them. But it feels
it can feel very personal. And at the end of the day, I think this is important for authors to know, because I didn't feel it at the very first, well before yourself or anyone in Ireland, when the editing at the publisher's stage came. And I was making concessions and making concessions. And then finally they did something that would be wholly out of my voice. I remember particularly, they started a sentence with "however." Which was one of those things that I think I still have bruises on my knuckles from teachers saying no. So I stood up and I said, "That's a bridge too far." And the editor was like, "Okay, your book, your words. I don't want to mess with it." And I thought, Well, bugger all, that was a lot easier than I was expecting it to be. I was ready to go to battle, right? But
Yeah.
it is, at the end of the day, it is our words. And someone has asked, how do we protect those words? At what point do we look at a copyright? Is it before we send it in? Is it after? I mean, is it protected? Do we have to worry when it goes to an editor or to a publisher that someone else might, inverted commas, steal it? Where does that part come in? Copywriting.
Copywriting comes in when the publisher slaps an imprint page on the book. That's part of the page proofs, and it will say first published in Ireland by blah, and the copyright date is in there. The author's moral rights are protected. There should be a clause in there. I've seen a new clause come into imprint pages now because there is a paragraph that starts off with all rights reserved, and it goes on to say no copying, no on if you want to copy any part of this manuscript, you have to apply to the publisher for permission. But it's also now starting to say no data mining is permitted either. Bit too late. You know, the AI companies have already scraped the internet. So
Emer is asking, how easy is it to switch publishers? She's got a publisher in the UK, but she doesn't feel like they understand the Irish market. So she's looking at swapping. I suppose it depends on how successful one is with the book that's being published.
Depends if you've already signed a contract and what the rights are, because the contract will cover the rights, and that includes like which countries have you signed for rights to. So UK companies would probably cover all of Europe, and possibly world rights. Could be world rights excluding the USA. Could be world rights excluding USA and Canada. They may look for an Irish co-publisher, but because it is so easy to sell books from the UK into Ireland, they tend not to do that, I think, because I do remember there were problems when I was working with Gill. They had done a co-edition with a UK publisher, and when we ran out of stock, the bookshops bought the book that they could get, and it was the UK edition, even though the UK publisher had no right to sell the book in Ireland. Inevitably, it ended up in Waterstones because they were ordering from head office. So if you haven't signed a contract and you think you'd rather be published by an Irish publisher, then hold off on signing and look for an Irish publisher. The question you asked about, you're afraid somebody would steal your idea. I mean, I've seen so many submissions and you think it's a great idea. It's a pity about how it's been executed. It's just not publishable. It's just not there yet. But no, it just doesn't happen because we're all about copyright in publishing. We cannot, we would be seen and you would be taken to court because you have your manuscript. You have the paper trail of emails where you submitted the manuscript and sent it to a publisher. If that idea then turns up in print a couple of years later and it wasn't written by you, then you see it happening a lot in the music industry.
Right.
That people will say, did you take a sample? Was it more than a sample? And that there's an awful lot of unintended plagiarism because there are only so many notes and so many combinations that you can include them in. And the same is true with books, that two people may have the same idea or a similar idea. So you would need to be very careful before you took a court case that this was your script and it had been plagiarized, because it simply may be that two people have had the same idea, written a similar book. It's very unlikely. It just doesn't happen. And it is an industry where a lot depends on trust. But if publishers were to break that trust, sure, we'd go out of business. It just
and that would be, and again, it is a business.
It is business, yeah.
None of us, highly fragile, artistic folk that put words into such eloquent order would ever think of what we do as a widget. But at the end of the day, it's kind of what it is. Now, there are particular widgets for particular customers and all that. But at the end of the day, it is a product. And as you said before, it's important for us to realize that what a publisher is trying to do with a book, even if it's not a vision we may have had, or we mightn't like a color on the cover or something like that. At the end of the day, if we've signed a contract, we should feel like we signed it with the correct publisher for that book, and we have to trust that they are doing their best, the publisher is,
yes,
to make something that will sell.
I've just realized I didn't quite answer one of your earlier questions about it is very important to find a freelance editor that you vibe with. So do always, even if you are contacting individuals off the website, do contact 2 or 3, because our prices may vary widely. And you may just find there is one person there that you really get on with, and that is important. But going back to the publishing thing, I have found in the past that authors have most difficulty with what a publisher wants to do with the cover. You can protect the words by asking your editor to use track changes. It can be really difficult to navigate, though. And
Yes.
the first thing that the publisher's in-house editor is going to do is establish the house style. So they'll have a house style for spelling, for things like words in particular. Some people spell out words 1 to 9 and it's digits thereafter. Sometimes it's 1 to 100 and digits thereafter. And it's that's a particularly thorny one.
The comma, the Cambridge comma, the
Oxford
comma.
Yes.
You know, the little
that's
thing.
actually American punctuation, even though it's called the Oxford comma.
And then don't get me started about whether to use a U in a spelling or not.
That's the easy one. That's the very easy one. But yes, you know, you will get the chance to see your script when it's in the editing process, because the editor is going to send you queries. And frequently that's done through using comments in Word at this stage. And if you're not using Word, please do try and use Word, because that is that's the industry standard. I know.
Are there any other industry standard little things like that? That I mean, to me, that's what I write in is Word. But other things that we should think about, not in a way of submission. Do we submit electronically? Do we send it in print form? You know, what are those little insider sort of bits, like always use Word?
It will be on the publisher's websites. They'll say how to submit. They'll have submission guidelines. It's in their best interest. And
is
it's electronic.
2 spaces after a period and double spaced and all that kind of carry? What?
Oh no, definitely not. Two spaces after a full point went out with typewriters. Actually, it was a typewriting thing.
Well, that's how I learned. And
it's how I learned as well, but I had to unlearn it.
I'm too old to unlearn.
Yeah. I personally like Times New Roman as a font. And I know that seems very old hat, but if you've got quote marks in your book and you have used a different font, especially a sans serif font, when that then gets converted and brought into the page makeup package, frequently you'll end up with straight quotes instead of curly ones. And it's a pain in the behind to change that and get that fixed. And once it gets into page makeup, if they're wrong there, that's really difficult. That can be really tricky to fix.
So Times New Roman, font size.
Oh yeah, 10 or 12 point. I mean, that is easy. You see, if you're submitting electronically, that sort of thing is easy enough to change. But I would submit in Times New Roman.
All right. And indented paragraphs?
No.
All right. Double spaced in between paragraphs, double spaced.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not. No. I mean, a lot of those things are easy enough to strip out. But if you look at a printed book, there's not going to be a space between paragraphs generally. It will be kind of, you can use the automatic indent, but don't tab is what I mean. Don't put a tab at the start of each paragraph. Don't worry too much about the formatting. But yeah, try and keep it as simple as possible.
But when we're submitting, we want it to look as professional. We want to look like we know what the hell we're doing, even though we are flying blind. So this is really really good. And one question that someone asks is, when it comes to submissions, you know, do we send in the whole manuscript? Do we send in a few paragraphs or a few chapters? I suppose that's all on the website as well as to. And if you're using an agent, the agent's going to know what the publisher is going to want to see.
I think you can expect, though, to have to write a short, like 150 to 300 word synopsis of your book. Doesn't have to be beautifully written. It just has to convey what it's about. A longer one, maybe up to 500 words. Possibly, again, it depends on the subject matter. It could be a synopsis chapter by chapter of the book, not necessarily. Generally, the first 3 chapters of the book and the table of contents.
Okay. Now, I've found that when I've done that synopsis kind of thing, that almost invariably some version of that ends up on the back jacket. That's what ends up. So when you're writing that synopsis, you know, plan on it being there. Is sort of that's the kind of language that a publisher is looking for. Is that correct?
It is and it isn't. I've been doing a lot of work with the O'Brien Press, and they generally write the blurbs themselves. Now, inevitably, the in-house editors will go to what the author has submitted initially, because when you do sign a contract, it's not, you don't just sign on the dotted line. You'll be given a marketing questionnaire to fill in, because they will be looking for all sorts of information about you, and some of it's quite personal. Obviously, they need your contact details as a start. They like to know where you live, kind of how you live. If you've been published before, they'd be looking for details of that. It's on that form as well that they'd be looking for the synopses. So the editors frequently will pick up on phrases there. You might be asked to write the blurb yourself, but some publishing houses will do it themselves, because we have the, not that we have the knowledge, but we know how to write for the reader. And an author is going to tell the reader what you want the reader to know about your book. What the publisher is doing is telling the reader what they need to know about the book. To sell the book, the reader needs to know that there's something in this book that's going to help them or change them or entertain them or inform them. So you have to try and write it from the reader's perspective, and that can be really hard to do for an author. You know, publishers, they're doing it however many times a year as they publish books.
So there's another question that I'd like to ask, because it's I've come to learn that what a book proposal is really is a marketing plan. It's a business plan for my product, my book. So is there a place where we can find a good template for a book proposal, which will include maybe those 3 chapters and the table of contents and a synopsis and all that? But is there a place that online that has a good version of a book proposal?
That is a good question, and the answer is I don't know. I think you'd probably be looking to writers' forums for that type of information.
Have you seen really good ones and really poor ones?
Yes, to both.
would my editor say, you know, I went to the EFIPMO website, say it again? I know that MS Ireland will put that up. What's the website again?
Oh, the FEPI Ireland.
FEPI, that's it. Would my editor that I approached through FEPI, would they maybe know about what a good proposal looks like?
Well, hopefully, yes, they'll have helped you make the script look the best it can. And then once I mean, this is the thing, if you're approaching publishers directly yourself, you really have to do your homework to find out, to make sure that you're sending it into the right publishers. And that will depend on who's publishing in your area, what size you think the market is, and to approach a publisher of a similar size, or to be aiming at the same kind of market. And you, yeah, some editors will help you write the approach letter, because you're not going to go in saying, I've written this brilliant book and you're going to beg me to publish it. That doesn't go down very well, that kind of approach. You do need to be able to say to the publisher what your unique selling point is. Have you researched the market? Are there other books that are in this same subject area as yours? And what makes yours different? Is it that there's an awful lot of UK published books in this particular area, but there's no Irish-based one? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things is also really important. Why is it that you are the person that should be writing this book, particularly if it's nonfiction?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the depressing things about publishing, is that being able to write is one of the least of the skills that you need to be able to get published. Having a good online presence. Unfortunately, now a lot of influencers are getting publishing contracts. Some of them have been quite tricky to work with, and some of them are a dream because they work incredibly hard. And sometimes they have a very strong idea of what they want their book to look like, and they just refuse to accept that, you know, maybe a publishing company with God knows how many centuries of combined experience might actually know a little bit better than they do.
So we've got a question coming in about poetry collections. I feel like probably poetry publication is a whole sort of different subset when it comes to nonfiction.
Yeah, it's very, very niche. It's incredibly difficult to sell. You want to go to the poetry publishers, because they'll know what to do with it. They'll have the editors who can edit poetry.
Oh Jesus! A poet being edited, that sounds like one of the most
Oh,
difficult things in the world to do.
listen, I have come across poets, only one or two. Seamus Heaney was the worst thing that happened to Irish poetry because he made it look easy. And the number of poets that I've met, okay, two, who had not mastered the basic tool of their trade. So I'm going on a little rant here. Please forgive me. They hadn't mastered the basic tool of their trade, which is the English language or the Irish language, depending on what language you're publishing in. But I was dealing with English language poets. And it's like, no, it's not that simple. So I'm not a poetry editor, really and truly, but there are a couple of poetry publishers in Ireland, and just go directly to them because the others just not going to be interested. They're not going to have each publisher will have their own niche in the market, and their sales and publicity they'll all have the right contacts for that. So it's, there's no point in approaching a publisher who is strictly nonfiction with a novel. They're not going to know how to sell or market it. So, and they won't have necessarily the in-house. I mean, to an extent, editing is editing, but you do need slightly different skills for fiction from nonfiction, if that helps.
So speaking of fiction, someone is saying I'm publishing my second novel. I'm finding that now my publisher is leaving a lot of the marketing and selling to me. It feels strange, particularly. I know when I've switched publishers for, when Collins Press retired, I had to switch, and I did notice difference in the way that things are marketed. But it does seem odd that from first book to second book, the marketing strategies would change. But that being said, certainly the publisher is leaning pretty heavily on the author to get out there and do the work. Our job isn't done when we've finished, the manuscript. It's not done when we've sat through and read the galleys aloud to make sure that everything is square. But when it comes to marketing, it really does need to be a team effort, yes?
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that will help you get a publishing contract. If the publisher thinks that you are the kind of author who will sell their own book, that makes such a difference. Because if you're teaching in a particular subject, and I don't mean secondary school teaching, like if you maybe are lecturing, I was working last year with an absolutely marvelous woman. She has written a book on the menopause, and she helps the HSE. She goes around to corporations, helping them develop menopause-friendly policies in-house, like something as simple as in banks, the uniform that the staff are required to wear. You probably have noticed over the last few years that things have gotten a little bit more relaxed, that the women don't have to wear these tight little pencil skirts that are definitely going to bring on a hot flush.
Yeah.
So things like that. So she's going out there, she's going into marketplaces, she's going into corporate settings, she's helping the HSE as well with some of their in-house training. So she's going to sell her own book. And that really helped her get a publishing contract. It also meant that she was a subject expert. You know yourself, Trevis, we worked in the Collins Press with an awful lot of walking guide authors because they are walking guides. They're going to sell them to the people who come on their walks with them. If you're doing it, even if you're just talking to your local history society, that's a targeted market in there. Your friends are going to buy your book. Your book club friends are going to buy your book. If you can sell your own book, but yes, the publishers will expect you to work incredibly hard. Hopefully, they'll have a little tour lined up of the bookshops. These days, generally, you don't get to sit down in a bookshop and sign copies for a queue of people coming in, because unless you're Graham Norton or Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, people are not going to queue up like that to buy your book on one day. But what the sales reps will do is they'll take you around to the bookshops and you'll meet the booksellers. Always be nice to the booksellers. They're the people who are going to sell your book and push it. And you'll sign the copies that they have. And they'll take a few photographs, and it's great for the bookshop social media. It's great for your social media and also for the publishers.
And I suppose that it's difficult when you've got such a broad time frame. But are trends in publishing something that writers like us should jump on, or by the time we jump on, are we going to be well behind the curve again?
Oh, well, that's such a difficult one to answer. It really is, because horribly, the trend at the moment is for celebrity authors. And you kind of wish, like, pick a lane, like Graham Norton, how much more do you need to do? And he's a really good novelist.
Yeah.
Richard Osman is another one. David Williams, is that the other one? Like, oh, for God's sakes, leave something for the rest of us.
Well, now here's another question that came in via email earlier. It had to do with a person who was writing something about autobiography, etc., in reference to traumatic brain injury, and their condition's gotten a bit worse. So the actual writing is becoming more difficult. So, like with the editors group, is there a place where one could go for lack of a better term, a ghostwriter?
Well, the editors group, if you look at FEPI Ireland, some of the editors offer writing as one of their services.
So and how would that work? You know, if I've got an idea and I've got some stories, etc., you know, is it better to have it something like that that's with someone, or is it just by me, but it's a ghostwriter who wrote it? Or does that just depend?
It depends. It depends. If you have contracted an editor to help you write the book and you have explained to them what's happening, and it may be that they'll do it via interview, that, you know, you'll talk and they'll record and type it up, or, you know, they'll put a bit more into the structure of the book and developing the story and, you know, asking the questions that help you tell the story correctly. If you've contracted them and paid them, then that's it. They don't have copyright in your book. But if you're doing it with somebody, very often you'll find somebody who has a really great story to tell but can't tell it themselves for whatever reason, and they team up maybe with a journalist that they know, and that will be X with Y. But that is definitely on a book-by-book basis.
When you'd sort of mentioned a little bit about that part that we talked about, self-publishing. And that when I started, that wasn't really much of a thing. But now it's a lot easier, but that means that you're doing everything.
Not necessarily. I mean, some people want to do everything. They want to have absolute control over what their book looks like. But I know what goes into publishing a book. I wouldn't do it myself, because, you know, everything from, you know, where do you go to get your ISBN, your International Standard book number with the little barcode at the back? Where do you go to? Because when you get the ISBN, you don't get the barcode with it, so you have to generate the barcode. So from everything as small as that to doing all the publicity, all the sales, finding a typesetter, finding a designer to design the cover for you, finding a printer. And some printers, you know, they won't necessarily deal with individuals, or they might ask for the money up front. Whereas, you know, if they're dealing with bigger clients, you know, that there's like the publishers, there's no problem there. But you don't have to do it all yourself, because there's a sort of a spectrum from what we'd call regular commercial publishing all the way down to the author who does everything themselves. There are a few companies who deal with the in-between. Now, there is really only one that I recommend to my clients, and it's Kazoo Publishing, Kazoo Publishing. If you Google them, you'll find them. There is a massive amount of information on the website, and Chanel Kyo, who runs the company, she comes from a traditional publishing background. I've seen samples of their work. It's 100% professional. The only thing that they won't offer is a copy edit as part of their service, because what each book requires is so different from book to book. It's a real how long is a piece of string question. Whereas once you get the edited script, it is easy enough. It's more controllable to say, well, this is what it's going to cost, because I know how many pages it's going to make. I know how many copies you want and where I'm going to print it. They also provide an ebook as well. They'll get an ebook made of your book too. Now, they're not the cheapest in Ireland. There are other self-publishing companies, but they are the best. I know there's a crowd in England. Is it Austin Macaulay Publishers, I think? And they actually do a bit of marketing as well, but they're even more expensive. I think it's something like about 10 grand to get them to do the book. And they're not really, I've seen one book that they did, and I was not impressed by the quality of either the typesetting, the design, the cover. And I subsequently heard from the author that they weren't very happy with the marketing push that they got. So, you know, there are some companies that there's one other very interesting company, and they have a completely barmy model. Jerry Kelly of Sprint Print. It's a digital printer. He comes from a regular printing background. He was originally, I met him first when he was working for Colour Books in Baldoyle, who printed regular books, hardback books, paperback books, all that sort of thing. So when they closed, he set himself up with Sprint Print, I think, and they're a digital printer. So he decided to set up a publishing company that would publish only the kind of books that were suitable for Sprint Print to print. In other words, paperbacks, mono, black and white, text only generally, and preferably not hardback. It's an absolutely barking publishing model, but it works for him. So yeah, why not?
So there's somebody who can publish just about any good bit of writing, and by good, I'm talking about saleable. I mean, just because, and I've said this before, I mean, the number of, you said a rejection letter is simply because it won't work. If only that were what I have seen in letters myself, to my agent who sent them back to me. You know, it's almost like every publisher who didn't want something had to give the reason, and they were never, this just doesn't work for us, which was unpleasant. In fact, early on, my agent gave me a copy of a book, and an old friend says 3 moves is as good as a fire, and I have no idea where it ended up, but it was a compilation of rejection letters to very well-known authors, the likes of, you know, Mark Twain and James Joyce and J.K. Rowling's and all. Everybody's been you know, turned down, and not always are they pleasant. So our time is flying by. We're nearly an hour there. This isn't no exception to any of them going on. But I do want to give you a chance to you know, kind of wrap up any final thoughts that you would give to someone who is passionate about writing, enjoys writing, and thinks that they've got something that's ready to be published.
I would quote the advice: write because you have something to say, not because you want to say something. That's the first very important thing. Absolutely right. It doesn't matter. Well, it matters to you whether or not you get published, but you don't know who you're going to touch with your writing. And so do try. It is very, very difficult to get a publishing contract. And there are far more writers out there than there are published authors, unfortunately. But you may be lucky. So do try, because you might end up writing something that touches someone. I'm just going to read you this quote, because there's an awful lot of existential angst in the world at the moment. And I came across this quote 2 years ago, and I read it nearly every day. It's, "Do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break. All things can be mended, not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you." And so I would say to all our writers here, write intentionally, extravagantly, and unconditionally. Just write. Passion comes across in your words. And, you know, it's hopefully you'll get the publishing contract. If not, go publish it yourself, because your words will touch someone.
Paula, thank you. You've answered a lot of questions. You've illuminated a lot for so many, and on a personal level, you've reminded me why you are such a dear friend to me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm sure everyone thanks you as well. Don't forget to mark your diaries for our next MS Writers Workshop. We'll take a bit of time off for the summer because, you know, it's the summer, both days of it here in Ireland. We'll be back on Tuesday, the 10th of September, and we'll discuss the ins and outs of online publications and how to get your writings seen by potential audiences with Ingrid Strach, who is executive editor for everydayhealth.com. Until then, I'm Trevis L Gleason. On behalf of MS Ireland, I'm wishing you and your family the very best of health. Cheers, and back to you, Fergal.
So just a reminder that this episode is recorded. So, and all the previous ones are also on our YouTube channel, the MS Ireland YouTube channel. And keep an eye on social media for tomorrow. I'll have it up tomorrow, and also links to the next one. I also want to thank Paula and Trevis. That was amazing, amazing chat. I enjoyed it so much. I definitely think there's room for another one, actually, where we just talk publishing gossip. Because I definitely think, there was a few times there I was going, maybe could we go into that deeper? But thank you so much. It was brilliant, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Take care.